makes it right. Tell him all about our trouble. Hear our faintest cry. Answer by and by. Feel a little prayer will turn and know a little fire is burning. Have a little talk with Jesus, makes it right. Praise the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Just glad to be in his presence one more time as we are here at the J.T Kerr Memorial Baptist Church here in Jacksonville, North Carolina, not the other one, Jacksonville, North Carolina. And we're just glad that we have some live members here in person, as well as those of you who may be connected via the internet. It's always good to be here in Bible study because that is what we're supposed to do. It's something that is supposed to start from infancy to the grave. Study to show ourselves approved unto God, to be workmen who need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And here we are again tonight. Now, one of the things that I have been keep touching on and look like I don't ever get a chance to talk about it, and it may not even be of interest to everybody. It may not be a big deal. But the Bible describes the people of God, or the chosen people of God, throughout. If you have to catch it, because in looking at hindsight, it doesn't matter to us which name they call them. All of them fit the same. They all are the same people. But there are various times when they utilize that specific classification, and then when we look at it after the fight, we kind of misapply it. So, to make sure that you know, there are three distinct names that those chosen people are called. The first one is Hebrews. They're called Hebrews. Then you hear them called the children of Israel or Israelites. And as you proceed through the Bible, they are called Jews. Now, if you didn't know how that made that transition, you would be certainly mixed up when people tell you, or they say Abraham was a Jew. Now that sounds right for us who are looking at it after the fact, but Abraham was not considered to be a Jew. Some people, of course, they would say Moses is a Jew. Moses would not be categorized as a Jew. Okay, now we move further down the line and we got King David. King David is not a Jew. But if we look at him now, we'll say all of them are Jews. Wouldn't we? We call all of them Jews, but they were not. We didn't hear the terminology Jew until after they were in captivity and brought out of captivity and went back to Jerusalem. That's when they start being called Jews. Now let's give you some biblical references. And I'll tell you this, you won't be able to read in the Bible and see where the transitions were made. All you do is, when you read something, you'll start seeing Jews, you start seeing Hebrews, you start hearing Israelites, but it's almost like they assume you already know, because it don't tell you when and where it started. All right, so the first thing, when we're talking about the children of God, we have to be talking about Abraham. That's where it starts. He is the one who is the original individual who received the covenant and the promise of God. In another study, we'll go back and look at the promises God made. And of course, we know that Adam had a promise, and we know that Noah had a promise, but Abraham is further down the line. But the Abrahamic covenant that God made with Abraham is what's established and in progress even now. They are the chosen people, and they are the chosen people because they are the descendants of Abraham. God made a promise to Abraham, if you want to check that out, starting in the 12th chapter of Genesis. Made the promise that he would be blessed among all nations. Everybody who blesses him will be blessed, and everybody who curses him will be cursed. So we've got Abraham. Nobody's calling him anything. He's just Abraham. But as we study more, Genesis, the 14th chapter, verse 13, can somebody find that? And we'll start seeing the first time that we are introduced to why he is so uniquely different and why all of a sudden everybody starts calling him something different. I'll tell you what's happening, and then we'll try to describe what is happening and why it's so different. Does anybody have Genesis 14:13? Please read that. It don't really matter. Okay, go ahead. But we want to make sure it tells us what we want to know.
Genesis 14:13, and there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plains of Mamre, the Amorites, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner, and these were confederates with Abraham.
Okay. That's all I need. Read it from your version of the Bible, because it may tell us something, because that really told us something, and you could have missed it, but I'm sure we missed it just by reading it. Just by him reading that, it told us something. And that is going to be the description. Go ahead, Minister Tyler.
It says, then a fugitive came.
A fugitive, all right.
Came and told Abram the Hebrew. Now he was living by the oath of Mamre, an Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner. And these were allies.
Allies, yeah.
With Abram.
Okay. And at this time, they're still saying Abram, because Abraham means father of many. Abram didn't have any child. So it's kind of hard to be named Abraham when you don't have any children. But because God gave him the promise, he became Abraham even when he didn't have a child yet. Let me tell you something about the origin of the word Hebrew, because that's the first time it's ever been used in the Bible. When they introduce Abraham, that's the first time it appears. And they're calling him that because we realize that his story was written after the fact. The reason, I'm going to tell you something about the word Hebrew and its origin that does not occur in the Bible, but the circumstances occur. If we would read the introduction to Abraham, we would know that he was told by God to leave his family. Leave his family and all of his kindred. Well, he didn't say all of his kindred. Leave your father. Because he takes kindred with him, because he ended up taking his brother's son with him, which was, if we read all of the Levitical laws, it was his obligation to take care of his brother's children. And this child, of course, would grow up to be Lot, and he has his own story. But let's stick with Abraham. First of all, to note what customs were in the days of Abraham. If you were born in Jacksonville, you stayed in Jacksonville. Your children would be born in Jacksonville. If you are a brick mason, your boys would be brick masons, and they would live in Jacksonville, and they would never leave. That's how they did it. That was the custom. Wherever you born at, that's where you stay at. Because we still got, nuances of that in our society today. You still call that home where mom and them were living at. Even though you may not go there anymore, but to them, that's where your home is, where you were born and where your people came from. Well, pre-Abraham time, that was understood. And it was understood for Abraham, but he was given, God told him to move. Prior to that, we don't have a recording of anybody else who was told to do that. We don't have anything recorded. And as a result, Abraham being the first, he had to cross many rivers, many territories. There have been occasions and other occasions when I will address geography, because I believe that you need to have some grasp of geography in order to understand how the biblical picture evolves. Because he comes from a place that geographically was called Mesopotamia, which is a broad region, but that's where he came from, Mesopotamia. He ended up going to Egypt. And from Egypt, he ended up going to Canaan. And Canaan is a place where Palestinians were living. And of course, Philistines and all of that ended up coming from that region. But the main regions of the biblical time of Abraham, I'm telling you all of this, like I said, everybody's not going to be interested in it, but I'm going to tell the whole story, and you pick out what you think is interesting. Because Abraham crossed so many regions and so many rivers, that word Eberite comes into bearing. The word Hebrew, when we go through its etymology, means one who crossed over the Euphrates or the Jordan. He crossed over many rivers, which most people did not do. So he was unique in that he was called a Hebrew. So that means that wherever he went, all of his offspring would be Hebrews. Because to the people around him who are stable and are structured, this man traversed. If you look up the etymology, Google is not going to tell you a whole lot, because the Google won't try to get into the biblical version. They will go back and say he was a descendant of Eber, who also is spelled Heber, and so he was a Heberite, because Eber, if you ever studied genealogy, there is a passage in the Bible that's very peculiar. It says Eber Peleg Ru, and people think that's funny, but that's what the name's Eber Peleg Ru, and that's the whole verse. In fact, that's the shortest verse in the Old Testament. Eber Peleg Ru, it was a chronological genealogy. And Eber is the great-grandson of Seth. And we realize, great-grandson of, when we say great-grandson, he moves on down the line, and he becomes one of the forerunners of the Abrahamic family. He is a grandson of Shem. And we have to go back to Shem, Ham, Japheth. So we can get in the weeds by going back through that. I'm going to try to stick with Abraham. The reason why he's called a Hebrew is because he has crossed many rivers. Specifically, he's crossed the Euphrates and he's crossed the Jordan to get to where he is. And that makes him a Hebrew. It also means that he's a migrant. He's not a person who has lived in that area. He's a migrant. I'm going to touch on some things as I say that. Jesus himself was migratory. He had to leave his country as a refugee. He had to leave his country as a refugee, and he had to go somewhere else to a foreign country. That's why we hear so much turmoil about not accepting people, because God always has had nomadic people. Here we find the first man who was called a Hebrew, and from there forward, everybody who is in his offspring, they become Hebrews. Now, question about that so far. Look at Genesis 39 and 14. See what that says. Genesis 39, 14. And where do we say all the origins are going to be found? What book in the Bible are all origins, the beginnings of everything, where it's going to be found? It's always Genesis. So if we're going to find out something about why he started being called a Hebrew, it got to be in Genesis. All right, somebody found 39:14. Somebody read that. All right, now, this is, by the time we get to this point in time, we have already established that there is a generation of Hebrews. By this time, we know that by the time we get to chapter 39 in Genesis, Abraham is dead and gone. So we are noting now that other people are calling them Hebrews. His offspring are also being called Hebrews. You'll see the same thing, Genesis 40 and 15. His generation or his offspring are also called Hebrews. All right, questions, comments? Now, three names that you'll always hear throughout the book of Genesis and throughout the Bible is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were Hebrews. Why were they Hebrews? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, why were they Hebrews? And not, well, specifically, Abraham is the only one to cross the rivers. So Isaac and Jacob are Hebrews because they are the children of Abraham. All right, so everybody who is a descendant of Abraham is going to be a Hebrew. So when we hear Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you'll hear that right on through into the New Testament, it say, we're the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they are all, Abraham is the beginning, the first Hebrew. Isaac and Jacob are his offspring, his son and his grandson. Now, when we go to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we're still reading in Genesis. And we'll see that his son Jacob had an encounter with a messenger from God. I'm telling you, I'm trying to link things that you've heard so that when you read it, it'll all flow together. Well, Isaac is the one who had, Isaac is the one, ended up having two sons, Jacob and Esau. But Jacob is the one who actually is the more prominent one, or the one who gets the inheritance. Yeah, he gets the inheritance. So his name is going to be prominent, but that name don't stick because he had an encounter with a messenger from God. Now, his tradition says that he wrestled with an angel. Some say he wrestled with God. He wrestled with God, and as a result, he was determined that he was not going to be defeated, and the messenger from God held him in such a way, and he held the messenger of God in such a way that he couldn't break away. So the messenger of God knocked his thigh out of place. Knocked his thigh out of place. But and permanently, from that point onward, they put into their diet system that whatever animal has a bone that separates from the socket, they can't eat that. That's in their food system now. That's in their kosher. Kosher is a system of eating, of what they eat. So that's where the kosher comes in. That's part of their kosher diet, is that they can't eat that. It's been separated from the hollow of his thigh. And whatever animal, all animals that walk have the same kind of joint. And so they can't eat that because of what happened to their forefather, whose name was Jacob. The reason why we don't hear so much about Jacob, we hear about Jacob's ladder. But after Jacob's ladder, we don't hear much about the name Jacob, because his name was changed by the messenger of God who wrestled with him and called him, from that point on, when his name was Israel. Israel means wrestle with God. That's where we get Israel from. Israel is the one who has 12 sons. And those 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. And from this point onward, they are known to everybody else in the coming years as the children of Israel and the Israelites. Keeping in mind that they call themselves Hebrews. They're still calling themselves Hebrews. They speak the Hebrew language, which was for them their native language. They spoke Hebrew. They now are spreading out. They are the children of Israel, ending up with 12, and they have the 12 tribes of Israel. And at some points in time, I'm going to take you through the history of Israel, because they use those 12 tribes. They go led by Moses. These 12 tribes of Israel are led by Moses. And they're the Israelites. And it's Jacob who leads them. Not Jacob, it's Joshua. Joshua leads them into the promised land. And that land becomes the land of Israel, which was originally given to Abraham by God. Now, if you haven't pieced that together in your readings, I'm trying to piece it together now, so that when you read it, you'll see all of this falls in place. So we start out with Abraham being a Hebrew because he came from somewhere else, came to a land he had never seen, and was led there by God. He had crossed over many rivers, had crossed over territory through foreign lands, had encounters with foreign people. Keeping in mind, we know about Moses and his encounter with Egypt, but you also need to know that Abraham had an encounter with Egypt 400 years, 4 centuries earlier. Not only that, but he brought a curse on the children of Egypt before Moses came on the scene 430 years ago. Keep that in mind. All of that's in your reading, but you got to read it to get to that point and see what that's going on. Questions, comments so far? So far, they are called Hebrews because that's their heritage now, because all of them are born or the offspring of a Hebrew. The only one who was called a Hebrew. So everybody who's the offspring of Abraham is a Hebrew. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob's name changed to Israel, who wrestled with God. He ends up with 12 sons. Now, we can go through a story about those, but I'm not King Solomon, I said, built up a great kingdom, but when King Solomon died, his son came in and did not expand. In fact, the nation split up into two separate nations. Like I said, we'll talk about all of that history as we go along. All right, divided. Together you stand, divided you fall. When they divided up, you remember I told you that they were a great nation, but a great nation divided, other people that they have beat up in the past are going to come at you now. And they come at one part of it, and the other part don't help them. Y'all hear what I'm saying? So we find that northern Israel falls to a nation called Assyria. And then, 100 years later, here we come with the Babylonians, who we hear about all the time. Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, they destroyed the southern kingdom. They also destroyed the temple. So now, that great nation is back to a group of defeated people who are taken away in exile. These Babylonians have a philosophy: if they conquer a nation, they will take you out of your territory and put you somewhere else. They don't want you to be together, because if you're together, you might be able to communicate, you might be able to set up some strategy so that you can retake whatever was yours. So they take you out. And that's what Babylonians did. And they put them into where their various kingdoms that they had conquered. All right? Are y'all still with it? Y'all still with it? I'm giving you the whole synopsis of the history of Israel, because they were lowly tribes, grew up to be a great nation. I'll give you a story, the actual lesson on that, because they end up in beginning, they rise to power, they become great, and then they have a decline, and they go into servitude. Now that they have been defeated by Babylon, they're going into servitude. They're still called Israelites who speak Hebrew. But then they're in exile. The Bible tells us for 70 years. An example is Daniel, who was taken as a little Hebrew boy. That's why y'all hear Hebrew boys, because they were Hebrews. Even though they were children of Israel, they were Hebrews. Three Hebrew boys. You hear about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those three. But Daniel was one of those. He was a young boy when they took him into captivity. But he was an old man when Persia came in and defeated Babylon. But we still know that the children of Israel are still in servitude. And what happens then is that the king of Persia has a different philosophy about how to treat people who have been conquered. He believes that they should go back to their own land. They should be able to worship their own God. But keep in mind, they have been displaced 70 years, and there is nobody among them who was pretty much, except for the older generation like Daniel, who was actually born in Israel. This new generation, after 70 years, these people have never been to Judah, have never seen Jerusalem. And so 70 years, that means that if you left somewhere 70 years, and it's just like repeating history, because if you remember the story of the Israelites, the 12 sons of Israel, when they had 10 sons, 9 of them, there were 11 sons, and 10 of them sold their little brother into slavery. That's Joseph. All right, so they ended up, in the long run, having to go to a foreign country, and that land was pretty much like a desolate area, which is, you
people who have been living in their area for 70 years, people who grew up there, over 70 years, you got people who have taken over that land. I mean, nobody lived here, we take it over. The land built 100, so we made it our own. So now you got a group of people who say this is their land, but they've never been here. They've never been to Jerusalem, which is in the land of Judah. And so now, the people who see them coming, they start calling them Jews. Because they're going back to Jerusalem, which is in Judea. And this doesn't happen until after their Babylonian exile. And they are allowed to go back by the king of Persia. So now they're going back and trying to repatriate or rebuild what was destroyed 70 years earlier. And other people have come in, nobody built the temple back, and nobody built the walls of Jerusalem again, but they're allowed to go back now. If I'm talking about all this, I need to show you some evidence. About Israelites, Genesis 32 and 29. Somebody read that. Because Genesis 32:29 is still talking about how they who are Hebrews are called the children of Israel. And they spoke Hebrew. Genesis 32:29. All right, when somebody finds it, don't be it. If nobody wants to do it, you do it. 32:29.
All right.
So that gives me a chance to be quiet.
All right.
This is 32:29.
Yes.
And Jacob asking him and said, tell me, I pray thee, my name. And he said, wherefore is it thee that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there.
Keep reading because I can tell you what he blessed him with. Okay.
And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. For I have seen God's face to face.
That's when he was supposed to be wrestling with God, so that's what he said he was wrestling with God.
And my life is preserved.
Keep going and should say what comes upon.
And as he passed over, Peniel the sun rose upon him, and he hated upon his thigh. Therefore, the children of Israel,
Okay, this is where the first time you start seeing this children of Israel thing. Go ahead.
eat not of the center where drank, Lord have mercy, which is upon the hollow of the thigh.
Right. That's what I was telling you all about. I just want you to know that that's in the Bible. I didn't make that up.
Amen. Unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew there, that trunk.
And separate, what it ended up doing was separating his thigh. He dislocated his thigh. He had a limp from this point on. So, but that's where the children of Israel, and that was the incident whereby his name was changed to Israel if you read the whole passage. So keep that in mind if you want to go back to a reference. Now, 16 other books after that.
Yeah, they know the guy with that.
So, but they're not the ones, they're not historical. They're prophets. And so, if we read what's happening in the book of Esther, and then we read what's in Ezra and Nehemiah, they're pretty much in history paralleling. What do I mean by that? Well, what is happening with Esther and the Jews who are around her is that they chose to stay in the kingdom of Persia and still practice their religion, because I told you the king of Persia allowed you to practice your own religion. He allowed them to go back to their original country, but none of them saw Judah and Jerusalem as their original country. They were born and raised in where they were. And so if you got born and raised where you are and you still practice what you want to practice, even though the Persians tried to kill them, they flourished and they maintained their integrity. So those are individuals who are Jews. They're called Jews because they're the same heritage as the rest of them. They're still children of Israel. But the group that went back under Ezra and Nehemiah, they're called Jews because they actually went back to Jerusalem, which is in the land of Judea. And everybody else was calling them Jews. The thing is, let's read some of it. Let's read Esther 2 and 5, and you'll hear about Mordecai. Esther 2 and 5. Esther 2 and 5. Read about Mordecai. You never heard of it. That's where he is. The book of Esther 2 and 5.
I'm reading from the New
Okay.
Translation. At that time, there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jar. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shishbil. His family had been among those with King Jehoram, and Judah had been exiled from Jerusalem. Babylon had been exiled.
Okay, that's good enough. All this establishing is that Mordecai, who is the hero of the story under Esther, Esther is the heroine. Of course, Mordecai is the one who is her uncle, who is the main character in the story of Esther. But they are called, he has his genealogy tied in with the children of Israel. And he just happens to be a descendant of Benjamin, who is actually the baby son of the 12 tribes of Israel. Israel's baby son was Benjamin. I can tell you a whole other story about that, because Joseph was the baby when he was sold, he was the baby. But while he was away, another baby was born, and his name was Benjamin, and that's why we find that he did not want to let his son go, and that's the only way. That's a whole other story. But I want you to know how that works. There were 10 sons, and then Joseph. But then they end up, while Joseph was in captivity, another son was born, Benjamin. But then Joseph required that in order for them to get food to send back to people who were in a famine, they had to bring their baby brother, which they didn't know that it was his baby brother too. And they had to bring him again. All right. We're going to tie all this together. I'm hoping that you're getting a lot of bits and pieces, that you're curious enough to know that this is one continuing story. And all these changing from Hebrew to Israelites to Jews is a continuum that the Bible don't stop to tell you we get ready to change now. It don't tell you that. But if you know what's happening and the transitions that are made, so that when we get to Esther, which I contend is city of Jerusalem, and that's where they centered everything and reestablished that area. And the people, because these people going to the land of Judah and the city of Jerusalem, they started calling them Jews. And of course, Ezra and Nehemiah reiterate that. And when you open up the New Testament, that's all you hear, Jews. You don't hear that throughout the Old Testament. Nobody thought all of them Jews until they have gone through the exiles. And then this becomes the second Exodus when they go back to Jerusalem, just like Moses tried to lead the people back to the land of Abraham that God gave Abraham. Because at the time that he went, there was no such thing as Israel, but he hadn't birthed those babies yet, right? I just want y'all to understand how it works, because this may not even be interesting to anybody, but if you are endeavoring to be a biblical scholar, then you want to know some of these things. And I'm sure at some point in time, trivia is going to come up in some cases. They always have little trivia things that don't really mean much to anybody. But you need to know how we get from Hebrews to Israelites to Jews. The Bible doesn't say, okay, now we're going to start calling them Israelites. Now we're going to start calling them Jews. There are no announcements made. It's sort of a subtle transition that events in history cause these name changes and for people to refer to them. When you get into the New Testament, they're always Jews because they say the Jews came against Jesus. Well, Jesus was a Jew too. But they didn't, of course, they didn't believe on the philosophy that he was preaching. And I'm going to tell you a short snippet about why they did not accept Jesus. And the ones who did not accept him were those who were educated in the law. The ones who accepted him, they were ignorant of the law. They didn't care about the law. All they cared about was what they saw and what he did. But those who studied the law and knew the law, like Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes, of course, another group too, Zealots, they did not believe him. Here's the reason why they would not accept him is because they felt like he was going to be a troublemaker and they would end up going back into captivity and losing what they had. They were satisfied with the status quo. They were satisfied that the Romans had come and the Romans had ruled everything, but the Romans let them worship, let them have a temple. Now, this troublemaker coming in and telling us that we're not doing it right because we're overlooking what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to love one another. Jesus came in teaching that as much as you've done it to the least of my little ones, you've done it unto me. When you didn't feed them, when you didn't clothe them, when you didn't provide them with help, then Jesus teaches that, and the people say, no, you're a troublemaker. And that's why they had to get rid of him, because in their memory and everything that their grandparents told them, the reason why they lost the kingdom under Solomon is because they really lost the kingdom because they had gotten away from God. And they had stopped following God's law and stopped doing everything God said do. And so now, this new generation of Jewish people, they're going to try to do everything God said, they think. They're going to try to do everything God said, so God will never get upset with them and cause them to lose their place and to go back into being slaves again. So they believe that Jesus was rocking the boat, and they had to get him out of the way. But that's always what the devil does. The devil always tries to get rid of the person who's bringing reform, because the devil wants you to be satisfied in the status quo. is that we need to overthrow whoever is in charge so that we can be in charge. Because God put us in charge when he gave the promise to Abraham. We're supposed to be in charge of everything, and everybody else is supposed to benefit from us. And so they built that philosophy up. And Jesus he didn't come in as a conquering king. He didn't come in on a white horse with a sword. He came as humbly as he could. And they said, no, he ain't the right one. Okay. Questions, comments? Because that's a whole other story. We're going to have to get in that by the time we get to April, because that's the Easter story. Or the story of the resurrection. Questions, comments? Yes, sure. This is, because everybody probably needs to know this, but everybody don't want to. Go ahead, questions.
So, listening to deliver this
Right.
explanation of the scriptures, how do you contrast and compare that to what we're going through right now in the United States of America? Having someone in the highest office and the things that he's currently doing in his administration, in the absence of desire for God.
Well, let me read you something else that let's see, if this is addressing exactly what you said, because it's indirect addressing. But here is what's happening. We're living. You remember I told y'all a couple of times about a new generation of Americans, and they're called the rise of the nuns. And I know y'all thought I was trying to get money. This is a national article. Over the past 25 years, tens of millions of people left American religion. It was a major shift that affected how people voted, when they married, and where they lived. Christianity took the hardest hit. Around 15% of American adults who once went to church stopped going. While some people switched to new faith, many left religion altogether. Experts call this phenomenon the rise of the nuns, a group that consists of atheists, agnostics, and people who said in surveys that they identified with nothing in particular. The nuns grew to include about 30% of the country. Then we find out that there is a revival in America, and the evangelicals said that we need to make sure that everybody is back to acknowledging who God is. But the problem with that is that they have acknowledged that they want America to be a Christian nation, but they're not looking at Jesus as being the king. Yeah, they want us to be a Christian nation, but they want America's Christian religion to be the authority of the land. And that should not be, because it never was meant to be. If you submit to the will of God, then you live according to God's will, and that would dictate what you're supposed to do. Now, if you say you're living for God and doing what's righteous and pleasing in God's sight, and I preach this all the time, we're supposed to be trying to be like Jesus. If we're trying to be like Jesus, then we love our enemies. If we're trying to be like Jesus, we're not looking over the downtrodden. We're not looking over anything in need. If we look at the current situation, and Jesus himself, people don't want to believe it, but Jesus was a politician. How do we know that? How do we know that? There were people, and I've just told y'all this, that people who rejected the Roman government being over them. Because Abraham picture, or it actually said, it was in scripture. They said that's Caesar. And Jesus said, you need to render unto Caesar what Caesar. In other words, you pay the taxes, you do whatever, you give reverence to whoever is in charge of the government. But it says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, render unto God what is God. And then he goes on to teach about the fact that if you're any other people, and then he goes on to say, when I was hungry, you fed me.
Two different things.
Yeah, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I didn't, I was sick, you visited me. And he said, wait a minute, I don't never remember you being sick. I don't never remember you being hungry. He said, well, you've done it to at least my little. You've done it with me. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples when you love one another. Now, that is contrary to the world system. But if we're going to be Christians, we can't beat the world system. John says, he that loveth the world hates God. And the world is not what God made. God made heaven and earth. The world is a system. And if the system says, we know we got to have these programs. And we know we got to have the money. So, but what we're going to do, instead of taxing the rich, we're going to give them a break. We're going to keep it so they don't have to pay. And we're going to cut some of the stuff we can give to the poor, like food stamps and Medicaid. Now, who is that hurt? It's really hurting more white people than black people. You know, we don't look at it. So, we are only less than 15% of the total population of the United States. So that means, and another 15 to 20% are Hispanic. The rest of them are white people. But all of them not rich. So that means there are more poor white people than there are poor black people. That's just across the board statistics.
Always out there.
Yeah, but they don't ever want to acknowledge it as long as we were talking about how that George Wallace used to talk all that crazy stuff, but he was a Democrat. And he didn't want those black people in his school. He said, oh, they're dead body, that bring you as Marcus. But also, the white people who supported him said, as long as you keep us one step ahead of black folk, we'll be all right. Keep us one step ahead of them. I don't care how much you make it bad for us, as long as they don't get a step ahead of us. That's true facts.
That didn't change either.
That down in Alabama. And that philosophy, people don't understand that there was a time when the governors of Alabama and Mississippi, Georgia were all Democrats, white Democrats. And when Kennedy, who was a Democrat from the North, started trying to do things for black people, of course he got killed out of the Texas. Which was a Democratic leader, but they all switched after that when Lyndon Johnson started doing things for black people and equal rights and talking with Martin Luther King. All of those people changed to Republicans. And the philosophy of Republicans changed because Republicans are the ones who freed the slaves. That's Jackson and Lincoln. Now I can go down this whole road, but we just need to know that the man of God has always spoken truth to power. From the king on down, it was the prophet who told the king, you wrong. It was the prophet who told the kings that they were wrong, and God wants it corrected. Because God has authority over all, and the prophets of God throughout the whole Bible are the ones addressing the plight of people and people in authority. Barber is one of the main ones doing it today in government. It's not gonna tell you. Because,
Well,
but
like-
you
well,
got some
the
writing
reason
in yours that tell you something in
Yeah,
that.
the reason I said that because in First and Second Kings it tells why they,
It's just, yeah.
because it's known and stuff like that. Yeah, but,
Like Chronicles and Kings are the same basic parallel story, but yeah. Obviously,
but it kind of says that,
Mhm.
Ezra and
Yeah.
Nehemiah, both, historic background was the same.
right, yeah, they actually, like I said, the Hebrew Bible has them as one document.
But then further down, it says that Ezra, I guess, I don't know if Nehemiah had died or something or what, I'm not really sure. But it says that, Ezra had Nehemiah's diary, and I guess.
He lived long,
So he finished telling the story of.
pretty much, and that's why I say originally was one continuous volume, but, New Testament, well, it won't be New Testament, when they canonized the Bible, they said that they were two separate individuals, because Nehemiah ended up being the governor over Judah, but Ezra was a priestly scribe. So he was the religious authority. He's the one that preached the word, and Nehemiah is the builder. He's the one that said, I'm building a wall and I can't come down. That's
So
Nehemiah.
is that the reason why they split them or separate?
Well, I don't want to cut too close to it, but that's kind of sort of, they're from two different perspectives.
Two different roads.
Right, because
Two different roads.
Nehemiah is not the God-sent person. It is the scribe, Ezra, who's a priestly scribe. He's the one that, when I tell people about how all of them stood up to hear the word, it's told in the book of Nehemiah, but it's Ezra who's the one.
Okay.
Right? And so, as a result, everybody stood up to hear the word, because what had happened prior to them getting there, they had never seen that before, because they had been in captivity and they didn't have the word of God. The only word of God they had was what was passed down through memory. And that is why some of the communist countries, there was a time when everybody had to memorize a chapter of the Bible, so that when you came together, you had the whole Bible. And everybody knew the whole, because somebody knew the whole thing. And that's how it was done before it was written down. But yes, then people get all mixed up, they hear somebody read that passage of scripture in Nehemiah, which said all of them stood up to read, but they said they stood up all day long, they had to make them go home and get something to eat. Just like Jesus was preaching the whole week during the day, and his disciples said, wait a minute, you got to let these people go and get something to eat. And they ain't have nothing to eat. So Jesus had to feed them. Okay, that's a whole other story, but you see some incidents that reoccur. That same thing that is in the book of Nehemiah, even though it's Ezra who was reading. Okay.
So that has to do with perspective, because if you look at First and Second Kings, did the same thing. First and Second Chronicles, we got the same stories, talk about the same thoughts.
Different viewpoints. One is a historical account, and one is a priestly account. Because in the priestly account, they tried to make David and his family, they tried to almost make them perfect and righteous. Even though they're telling the story, they're not telling the bad stuff. And where you see Kings, they're kind of telling from how this happened. I don't care who, but if you put them all together, you see the same events took place. Yeah, that is a different perspective from Kings and Chronicles, and from Ezra and Nehemiah. They're telling the same story, and they overlap, but you get some different perspective. And if you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that's the same thing happens. That's why we have to study the scribes, break that down, and we know that when we see it, we won't be confused by something that comes up that don't fit have not want Jews here. You know, because if you talk to a person today and you ask them the question, was Abraham a Jew? They're gonna say yes. I mean, if you hadn't been here tonight, you would say yes too. Because look, if we put it all back, we'll make them all. We'll make Abraham a Jew, and we make Moses a Jew, and none of them were called Jews until after they came out of the exile. Of course, it'll make Jesus a Jew, but also he is a Hebrew. Everybody that's a Jew, everybody that's a Hebrew is not a Jew. However, collectively, we can make them all the same. They can make them synonymous. The same way, and I use this, and it's not a facetious joke. They call us Negroes, colored, and black. Depending on what era you lived in, all of those meant the same. All of those to us now mean the same thing. It was a different time of the season that we would call that. We would call Negroes who were comfortable with it.
Color on my birth certificate.
And they call it color. And you would, and they don't change it. They didn't change it. Right. They didn't change it because James Brown changed it. But if you call me black in 1966, it was automatic fighting words. That's automatic. There are two things that you automatically fight over when you're a teenager. When I was a teenager. You talk about my mama and you call me black. That's automatic. All right. Anybody else have another word? But I'm hopeful that you gained some, since I've been toying with that, said I will explain the difference, because there's nowhere that it is actually explained. There's nowhere in the Bible that what I just told you is explained in that way. You have to take this and take that and take this and put it together and make it. You let it go into its transition, because the Bible just tells you to start talking about Hebrew. Then the next time you read, you're talking about the Israelites. The next time you read something, it's talking about the Jews. It don't tell you when it starts. But I'm hopeful that I've given you some transition periods. All right. That's what you were trying to do. Okay. So, we would ask that someone would give us a closing prayer. We're thankful that all of you were here tonight.
Father, our God,
Thank you, Lord.
certainly thankful for all of your many blessings. We have so many we just don't know how to count them. But every breath that we breathe, we realize that it's a blessing from you. We thank you.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you for all that you've done. We ask you to continue to work with us in our hearts and our minds, that we not sin against you. We not sin against one another, that we would help one another do those things you would call us to do. We shall ever give your name the praise. Keep us safe until we're able to meet again. And like I said, we'll give your name the praise. In Jesus' name we pray and ask these blessings. There's many more that ways heavy on each of our hearts, but you know what we need. So I ask your blessings once again. In Jesus' name.